So I'm in our greenhouse this morning. We always like to start our days in the greenhouse before it gets too hot. This is our beautiful 1850 Mackenzie Moncur greenhouse, and during the summer we use it for growing tomatoes, cucumbers, aubergines and chillies. So I thought I'd bring you guys in here and just show you how we grow things and a few little tips to give you a bit more success in the greenhouse. Cucumbers are a fantastic crop to grow, and they're fairly easy as long as you follow a few basic rules. They're not hardy enough really to grow outdoors unless you're in a very warm part of the country or you have a nice warm south-facing wall. For us up in Scotland, we have to grow them in the greenhouse. We train ours vertically. You could just let them sprawl all over the place and you would get cucumbers from them, but you get a lot more problems with stuff like mildew. They'll take up a lot more space and the cucumbers would end up where you don't want them. We found if we've let them sprawl, they go down between our heating pipes and then grow a cucumber and then we can't get them out. So we train them up quite strictly up these canes and strings. You can just use strings, and as the cucumbers grow, gently twist them around the strings. We prefer to use the canes because it reduces the risk of us snapping them out, which is very easy to do. So all you have to do is put a nice sturdy cane into your pot. Make sure it's not going to fall over. That's why we've got these strings holding them up as well, because the weight of the plants can be quite significant when they get tall. And as they grow up, just gently tie them in. And what's really important is to pinch out the side shoots as they grow. What they'll try and do is grow a little side shoot from the node of each leaf. And that'll get longer and longer and longer, and it will flower and produce cucumbers, but it'll just go all over the place. So when the side shoots have got 2 leaves, just pinch out the tips and you'll get cucumbers rather than lots of leaves. So I'm just going to tie this one in. There is a technique to tying in really anything where you don't want the string to slip up and down on the cane or the string that you're tying to. All you have to do is get your string, put it twice round whatever you're tying to. So you make a little loop, go twice, maybe even 3 times round, cross it over, and then tie it round the plant that you're tying in, and just do a normal overhand knot to tie it in. It's very simple. The principle of this is that if you go twice around the thing that you're training into, the knot won't slip. So we use this knot for our fruit trees, for our roses, tomatoes, cucumbers, all of that kind of thing, and it works really well. The other thing that's very important is that you don't tie the stem of the plant in really tight. You've got to give them room to grow. So we tie them in tight enough to pull them close to the support, but not so much so that when they grow the string digs in and it damages the stem. So it's as simple as that. Nice sharp pair of snippers to cut it. When it comes to feeding, we just use tomato fertiliser for our cucumbers. They're very hungry plants, so we have to feed them once a week with quite a high rate of high potassium fertiliser. So something like Tomerite or seaweed-based tomato fertiliser works really well for these. They like high humidity, so we keep them very well watered. That's really important. With these big leaves, they're transporting water up from the roots really quickly, and if the roots dry out, the leaves will sag and then they'll start dropping cucumbers to preserve the moisture that they've got. So keep them very well watered. It's a really good idea to water the leaves as well on cucumbers to stop red spider mite, which is a little insect that eats the leaf lamina, and they dislike damp conditions. So when we water the base of the plants, we water all the leaves as well. And that keeps them nice and healthy. That's actually the opposite of what we do with the tomatoes, because if you get the foliage too wet on tomatoes, it increases the risk of getting tomato blight. So it's as simple as that. And the other important thing with cucumbers, like all the cucurbits, they will grow so quickly. If it's warm and moist, the cucumbers will grow so quickly, and it's really important to keep up picking them. If you let them get bigger and bigger and bigger, what will happen is they'll stop producing new small cucumbers further up the vine. So as soon as they get to a decent size, pick them, and then they'll keep on producing all the way through the summer. Right, so aubergines are probably the trickiest plant we grow in the greenhouse, and we don't always have great success with them because quite often the summers up here in Scotland aren't quite warm enough for them to be successful. This year it looks like we're going to get a fairly good crop because we've had such hot, dry weather. Basically, you grow them very much like you grow a chilli. Again, they need very high temperatures and they need a lot of moisture. What you do is you let them grow to about 1 foot tall, and then it's best to pinch out the growing tips. So I'm going to do that now. You can just use your fingernails to do that. And what that does is it puts the energy into the fruit and stops the plant from getting huge but not having the energy to grow more aubergines. And it's really important not to be too greedy, and you can only really expect to get 4 or 5 aubergines per plant. So when you see 4 or 5 set fruit like this one here, you unfortunately have to pinch out all the other flowers and stop them from growing any more. Just like the cucumbers, it's quite important to keep the foliage moist to prevent red spider mite, because they just love these big soft leaves. So damp down the whole plant, keep them very well watered. Again, a high potassium fertiliser, so a tomato fertiliser every week or every 2 weeks. You can always tell with any plant whether it needs feeding because the new leaves will start to look pale. And if they're starting to, rather than looking a nice dark green like this, if they're starting to look a bit more yellowy, you know that you've got to feed them. But if you regularly water them every week or every 2 weeks, you shouldn't have that problem. Right, so growing tomatoes is fairly similar to growing cucumbers. We grow them upright up these poles and strings, just like the cucumbers. The types of tomatoes we grow are cordon tomatoes or indeterminate, which means basically they have one big long main stem and we take all the side shoots out. The other type of tomatoes are bush or determinate tomatoes, and those tend to be a lot lower and they're very bushy and you don't have to train them or anything like that, they just grow and you get lots of little tomatoes. We find these tall ones, there's a wider range available to us and they tend to be more productive for us. So the principle is just the same as the cucumbers. As they grow, you tie them into the canes, quite tightly but not too tightly. And then at the nodes they try and grow small side shoots and you snap them right out. You don't worry about pinching them out, you snap them out. And if you get them when they're small, you can just use your fingers and snap them out. If they're a little bit bigger, you need to use a pair of secateurs. So you're just looking for this main central stem with the trusses of the tomatoes coming out each side. And you tie them in all the way up to the top. Again, we use obviously a tomato fertiliser for these once a week. They're very hungry and they're very thirsty. It's really important to keep tomatoes moist all of the time, not wet but moist. What you'll find is if they dry out, you'll get what's called blossom end rot, and that's a little brown patch at the end of each tomato, and that's caused by a calcium deficiency, which in turn is caused by the lack of transpiration from the roots up through the stem. So if you stop that water flow going up through the plant, it can't take the calcium up that it needs to form the tomatoes and you get this blossom end rot. So if you see brown patches on the end of your tomatoes, you're not watering them properly. And again, the same applies. Keep picking your tomatoes, they'll keep producing. We start ours in a heated greenhouse earlier on, and then we put them out into our unheated greenhouse from about May onwards. They don't like temperatures below 10 degrees, so you've got to make sure that you shut the vents up at night if it's going to be cold, otherwise you'll get the leaves curling up or even the tomatoes dying if it gets really cold. But we find that they're fairly straightforward. They're a great crop to grow. It's really good to grow tomatoes with kids because they're so sweet and delicious and they're so quick to grow, you can really see their progress. The watering, as I said with the cucumbers, it is slightly different. Just make sure you water the pots and not the foliage. If you're in an area that's very humid or is prone to potato blight in particular, you may well get tomato blight, and that's little brown splotches on the leaves, and it's best to avoid that. Tomatoes can be grown outside, particularly in the south of England. Certain varieties, such as Outdoor Girl, really lend themselves to growing outside. And if it's a hot summer, you'll get pretty good results. But again, they're much more prone to blight if you grow them outside. So